Whispers in the shadows. The
We are
polishing
here
cloth moved in
today to
small,
discuss
practiced
the
circles across
future
the
of our
surface of the grand
company.
piano,
Indeed,
guided by hands
the
that knew every
decisions
curve
we
and edge of
make
the instrument
now
better
will
than they knew
shape our
comfort.
path for years to
Amelia
come.
Novak worked methodically in the empty recital hall, the evening light casting long shadows through the tall windows. At 24, she had perfected the art of invisibility, efficient, thorough, and utterly forgettable to the instructors and students who passed her daily. Ms. Novak, the East practice room still need attention. Mrs. Harrington, the administrative director, called from the doorway without truly looking at her. And remember, tomorrow's quarterly board meeting means everything must be immaculate. Yes, ma'am, Amelia responded, her voice soft but clear. I'll finish here and move to those rooms right away. As Mrs. Harrington's footsteps faded, Amelia allowed herself a small sigh. 3 years at the Wellington Music Academy, and still most people assumed she was just part of the maintenance staff. Few knew she also managed inventory, coordinated practice room schedules, and handled dozens of administrative tasks that kept the prestigious institution functioning. Fewer still knew that she had taught herself to play 5 instruments by watching lessons through half-open doors. The academy had been her salvation after aging out of the foster care system at 18. Following years of bouncing between homes, where she was treated as little more than an inconvenience or a paycheck, Amelia had learned to find sanctuary in music. Every foster home had some instrument, a neglected piano, a forgotten guitar, a dusty violin, and while families might forget her birthday or school events, they rarely noticed when she slipped away to practice for hours. Amelia finished with the piano and gathered her supplies. The building had nearly emptied for the evening, the corridor silent except for the distant sound of a single violin, probably Professor Whitaker working with his star pupil Gabriella for the upcoming showcase. Amelia paused to listen, identifying the minute imperfections in timing that even Gabriella, with all her formal training, couldn't quite master. In the East Wing, Amelia methodically cleaned each practice room, saving her favorite for last, the small corner room with slightly worse acoustics that nobody fought over. Here, in the quiet hours between her official shift ending and the building closing, she sometimes allowed herself to play. Tonight, after ensuring she was truly alone, Amelia sat at the upright piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, before beginning Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She played without sheet music, her eyes closed, feeling each note rather than simply playing it. Under her touch, the supposedly inferior piano sang with a depth of emotion that transformed the dusty practice room. What Amelia didn't know was that Julian Reed, the 32-year-old composer who had recently inherited ownership of the academy from his uncle, had stayed late reviewing financial records in his rarely used office down the hall. The music drew him from spreadsheets and budget concerns, pulling him toward its source with an almost magnetic force. He paused outside the practice room, transfixed. Through the narrow window in the door, he could see only the back of a young woman, her posture transforming from the hunched invisibility of service staff to something regal and commanding. The music spoke of longing, of beauty found in melancholy, of strength within vulnerability, interpretations he'd never heard from even his most accomplished students. Julian started to open the door but hesitated. There was something intensely private about this moment, as though he'd stumbled upon someone's innermost thoughts. Instead, he made a mental note to discover who this mysterious pianist was. In 3 months as the Academy's reluctant new owner, trying to balance his composing career with unexpected administrative duties, this was the first time he'd felt genuinely intrigued by anything within these walls. Inside the room, oblivious to her audience, Amelia played the final notes and let the sound fade into silence. Tomorrow would bring another day of invisibility, of yes ma'ams and right away sirs, of watching others pursue the dreams she kept locked away. But for these stolen moments, with music flowing from her fingertips, Amelia wasn't the forgotten foster child or the overlooked employee. She was exactly who she was meant to be. She closed the piano gently and gathered her things, slipping back into her role before stepping into the hallway. The practice room returned to silence, but something had shifted in the Academy's carefully ordered world. Someone had finally noticed the music in the shadows. Notes of recognition. The quarterly board meeting of Wellington Music Academy proceeded with its usual formality in the oak-paneled conference room. Julian Reed sat at the head of the table, his attention drifting between budget reports and the persistent memory of last night's mysterious pianist. The board members, mostly friends of his late uncle, droned on about endowments and enrollment numbers, while Julian sketched musical notations in the margins of his agenda. "Mr. Reed, your thoughts on the upcoming international showcase?" prompted Theodore Blackwell, the longest-serving board member, his tone suggesting it wasn't the first time he'd asked. Julian straightened in his chair. "I believe we should reconsider the program. Tchaikovsky and Mozart are safe choices but hardly inspiring. The Academy needs to demonstrate innovation, not just technical proficiency." "Innovation is risky," countered Mrs. Harrington. "The showcase attracts our most generous donors. They expect tradition." "They expect excellence," Julian corrected. "And excellence without passion is just mechanics." He closed his portfolio. "I'll review the showcase program personally. Now, if there's nothing else." The meeting adjourned and Julian made his way through the Academy's corridors. Students and faculty alike straightened as he passed, offering deferential nods to the man whose name graced the building's west wing, a testament to his family's 3 generations of musical legacy. Julian acknowledged them with distracted courtesy, his mind elsewhere. Near the practice rooms, he paused. A young woman was carefully replacing sheet music on shelves, her movements efficient but graceful. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her simple clothes neat but unremarkable. Something about her posture triggered recognition. "Excuse me?" he called. Amelia turned, momentarily frozen when she realized who had addressed her. "Mr. Reed, how can I help you, sir?" Julian studied her face, warm amber eyes, a dusting of freckles across high cheekbones, lips pressed together in what seemed like habitual restraint. "You work here?" "Yes, sir. Emilia Novak, Facilities and Administrative Support." She shifted, the remaining sheet music in her arms. "Is something unsatisfactory with the preparations for today's meeting?" No, everything was fine. Julian found himself uncharacteristically uncertain. This couldn't be his pianist. Her demeanor was too reserved, too cautious. "Have you worked here long, Ms. Novak?" 3 years next month, sir." Julian was about to dismiss her when he noticed her fingers, long, slender, with the calloused fingertips of someone who spent hours at piano keys. "Do you play, Ms. Novak?" The question visibly startled her. "I dabble, sir. Nothing worth mentioning." Before Julian could probe further, Professor Whitaker approached with Gabriela Torres, the Academy's star pupil, in tow. "Julian, wonderful news. Gabriela has been invited to perform with the Philharmonic next season. First student in a decade to receive such an honor." The conversation shifted, and by the time Julian looked back, Emilia had disappeared. Over the next week, Julian found himself increasingly aware of Emilia's presence around the Academy. She seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, arranging chairs before recitals, delivering correspondence, quietly resolving scheduling conflicts between temperamental instructors. Yet she moved like a shadow, eyes downcast, speaking only when addressed. After another late evening of work, Julian deliberately walked past the east practice rooms. Sure enough, faint music drifted from the last room. Not Chopin tonight, but an original composition Julian recognized as his own, a challenging piece he'd published the previous year. He approached silently and peered through the window. Emilia sat at the piano, eyes closed in concentration as her fingers danced across the keys. But what astonished Julian wasn't just her technical proficiency, it was her interpretation. She'd taken his composition and found emotional depths he hadn't fully realized were there, transforming what critics had called intellectually brilliant, but emotionally distant into something profoundly moving. This time Julian didn't hesitate. He opened the door. The music stopped abruptly as Emilia jumped to her feet, horror washing over her face. "Mr. Reed, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be using the facilities for personal How long have you been playing? Julian interrupted, entering the room and closing the door behind him. Amelia swallowed hard. Always, I suppose, since I was old enough to reach. Piano keys. Where did you study? Her eyes dropped. I didn't, not formally. Julian's brow furrowed. That's not possible. The piece you were playing requires years of training. I learned by listening, sir, and watching. Her hands twisted together nervously. I've attended many lessons here while cleaning or delivering messages. Julian circled the piano, trying to reconcile this unassuming employee with the musician who had so captivated him. Play something else, he said. Not a request, but not quite a command. Hesitantly, Amelia sat down again. After a moment's thought, she began Bach's Prelude in C major, then seamlessly transitioned into her own variation, complex, innovative, yet respectful of the original structure. Julian watched her transformation, how her shoulders relaxed, how confidence replaced caution, how music seemed to flow through her rather than from her. When she finished, the silence between them hummed with possibility. The Academy's annual scholarship auditions are next month, Julian said finally. You should enter. Amelia gave a small, sad smile. Staff aren't eligible, sir, and I lack the formal prerequisites. Prerequisites can be waived, and employment status can change. Julian moved toward the door, then paused. Unless you prefer remaining invisible, Ms. Novak? Their eyes met, and for the first time Amelia didn't look away. My experience has taught me that visibility comes with risk, Mr. Reed. Julian nodded slowly. So does every worthwhile endeavor. He opened the door. Think about it. Your talent deserves recognition, not shadows. After he left, Amelia remained at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. For years, music had been her sanctuary, private, safe, hers alone. Sharing it meant vulnerability. It meant potential rejection. It meant hope. And hope, for someone who had learned early that hoping too much only amplified disappointment, was the riskiest proposition of all. Symphony of Challenges. 3 weeks after their encounter in the practice room, Amelia still hadn't given Julian an answer about the scholarship auditions. She'd returned to her routine of invisibility during the day, though she noticed Julian, watching her from across rooms with an intensity that made her simultaneously uncomfortable and exhilarated. Their paths crossed frequently, too frequently to be coincidental, and each time, his questioning gaze asked the silent question she couldn't bring herself to answer. The Academy buzzed with preparations for the international showcase now just 2 weeks away. Donor invitations had been sent, programs printed, and selected students rehearsed relentlessly. Julian had indeed revised the program, incorporating more contemporary pieces alongside the classics, raising eyebrows among traditional faculty members. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Amelia arrived to find the Academy in chaos. Gabriela Torres, the centerpiece of the showcase, had fallen during a dance rehearsal and fractured her wrist. Professor Whitaker paced the corridor outside the administrative offices, his face ashen. 6 months of preparation ruined, he lamented to Mrs. Harrington. The Yasunaga Foundation representatives are flying in specifically to hear her perform the Tchaikovsky. Without Gabriela, we might as well cancel the entire showcase. What about Derek Phillips? Suggested Mrs. Harrington. He's nearly as accomplished. Nearly, isn't sufficient for the Yasunaga grant. That funding represents 1/3 of our annual scholarship budget. Professor Whitaker ran a hand through his thinning hair. And Derek lacks the emotional range for the centerpiece. Amelia quietly arranged sheet music in a nearby cabinet, making herself as unobtrusive as possible while listening. The Yasunaga Foundation's grant was crucial. Without it, many talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds would lose their opportunity to study at Wellington. Students who, unlike her, might actually get their chance. Later that afternoon, Julian called an emergency faculty meeting. Amelia served coffee, moving silently around the tense room as instructors argued over possible solutions. We have no choice but to substitute a faculty performance, Professor Whitaker insisted. None of our current students can master the showcase program in 2 weeks. Our donors are coming to see student excellence, not faculty, countered Professor Lee. It undermines our entire mission. Julian, unusually quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly looked up and caught Amelia's eye as she refilled a water pitcher. "Ms. Novak," he said, silencing the room. "You're familiar with the showcase program, I presume?" Amelia nearly dropped the pitcher. "Yes, sir. I've prepared all the sheet music for the rehearsals." "And have you heard Gabriella practicing the Tchaikovsky?" She nodded, acutely aware of every eye in the room turning toward her. "Could you play it?" A stunned silence fell. Professor Whitaker's mouth opened in indignation while Mrs. Harrington looked thoroughly scandalized. "Julian," Professor Whitaker sputtered, "Ms. Novak is maintenance staff. This is hardly the time for—" "She's a pianist," Julian interrupted. "An extraordinary one." Amelia felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your confidence, but Professor Whitaker is right. The showcase requires—" "Answer the question," Julian insisted gently. "Could you play it?" Amelia took a steadying breath. "Yes. But nothing." Julian stood. "I want to hear you play it. Now." What followed was the most surreal 30 minutes of Amelia's life. The faculty followed them to the recital hall, whispering among themselves as Julian led her to the grand piano. Hands trembling slightly, Amelia began the Tchaikovsky concerto that had been Gabriella's centerpiece. The first few notes emerged hesitantly, but as Amelia surrendered to the music, everything else faded. Her fingers found not just the notes, but the soul of the piece. The longing, the triumph, the delicate balance between technical precision and emotional expression. When she finished, the hall remained silent for several heartbeats. Professor Lee was the first to speak. That was unexpected. It was adequate technically, Professor Whitaker conceded reluctantly, but hardly showcased quality. The Yasunaga representatives expect perfection. They expect authenticity, Julian countered, which Ms. Novak delivers in abundance. But the program requires more than just the Tchaikovsky, Mrs. Harrington pointed out. There's the Bach, the Debussy, the contemporary pieces you insisted on adding. "I can play them all," Amelia said quietly, surprising herself with her own certainty. "And I have an idea for the finale that might make the showcase truly memorable." Julian's expression brightened. "What do you propose? A variation on your Symphony No. 3, the one you've been composing?" Seeing his surprise, she added, "I've heard you working on it in the West Wing. If we adapted it for piano and string quartet, with elements from each previous piece woven throughout, it would create a narrative thread for the entire showcase." The room erupted in opinions, some intrigued, others dismissive, but Julian silenced them with a raised hand. "That's exactly the innovation this academy needs." He turned to the faculty. "Ms. Novak will perform the showcase, with her adaptation. As the finale, Professor Lee, I'd like your string quartet to collaborate with her." "This is highly irregular," protested Mrs. Harrington. "So is greatness," Julian replied simply. The next 2 weeks transformed Amelia's carefully ordered world. By day she rehearsed, relentlessly with Professor Lee's quartet, her status shifting uncomfortably between employee and artist. By night she worked with Julian in his private studio, developing the finale adaptation. Their collaboration was intense, exhilarating, and increasingly intimate. Not physically, but in the way only musicians can be intimate, sharing parts of themselves through notation and interpretation. "Why did you never audition before?" Julian asked one evening as they worked. "With your talent, you know why." Amelia marked a passage in the score. "People like me don't belong in places like this." "People like you?" "Orphans, foster kids, people without pedigrees or connections." She kept her eyes on the music. "I applied for admission 5 years ago. Was rejected without an audition. My application apparently lacked sufficient background indicators of musical aptitude." Julian's expression darkened. "That was my uncle's policy, not mine." "It's the world's policy, Mr. Reed." "Julian," he corrected. "And the world is wrong. The night before the showcase, disaster struck again. Professor Lee called Julian in a panic. 2 quartet members had fallen ill with food poisoning. With less than 24 hours until the performance, the carefully constructed program was in jeopardy once more. Emilia found Julian in the recital hall, staring at the empty stage. "I heard about the quartet," she said. "What will we do?" Julian looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I don't know. Without the quartet, your finale can't." "What if I rearranged it?" Emilia suggested. "For solo piano, it would mean working all night, but you've already done the impossible these past 2 weeks. Then let me do it once more." She sat beside him. "This showcase isn't just about the Academy anymore. It's about proving that music doesn't care where you come from, only where you can take it." Julian studied her face, seeing not just determination, but something deeper, a lifetime of fighting to be heard. He reached out and for the first time touched her hand. "Then we work all night." And they did, rewriting, adapting, rehearsing, until dawn painted the recital hall windows with pale light. As exhaustion gave way to a strange electric clarity, something shifted between them, unspoken but undeniable. In the quiet moments between furious creation, their eyes met with increasing frequency, each glance an admission neither was quite ready to voice. By morning, they had transformed potential catastrophe into opportunity. The showcase would go on, different than planned, perhaps more intimate, but no less powerful. As Julian finally sent Emilia to rest before the evening performance, he caught her hand again. "Whatever happens tonight," he said softly, "you've already changed this academy, and you've changed me." The simple sincerity in his voice followed Emilia into dreams filled with music and possibility, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that after tonight, she could never return to the shadows. Dissonant whispers. The Wellington Music Academy's Grand Hall had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathered elite, board members in tuxedos, donors draped in jewels, music critics with discerning expressions. Programs bearing the last-minute change, featuring Emilia Novak piano, circulated through manicured hands, raising eyebrows and prompting whispered questions. In the small preparation room behind the stage, Emilia stared at her reflection in the mirror. The emerald gown Julian had insisted on having delivered to her apartment clung to her frame elegantly, making her almost unrecognizable to herself. 3 weeks ago, she had been polishing this very stage. Tonight, she would command it. A soft knock preceded Julian's entrance. He paused in the doorway, momentarily speechless. "Is it too much?" Emilia asked, smoothing the fabric nervously. Julian shook his head slowly. "It's perfect. You're perfect." He approached, adjusting his cufflinks, a habitual gesture she'd noticed he made when nervous. "The Yasunaga representatives are seated front row center. Theodore Blackwell has been telling anyone who will listen that this is a catastrophic mistake." "Is it?" Emilia's voice was barely audible. Julian lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "The only mistake was keeping you invisible for so long." His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary. 5 minutes, Ms. Novak. Time to rewrite your story." As Julian left, Mrs. Harrington entered with a tight smile. "Ms. Novak, a word of advice." She adjusted Emilia's already perfect necklace with cold efficiency. "Remember your place after tonight. These people may applaud you, but you don't belong in their world. Mr. Reed's momentary fascination doesn't change that." The words stung with their calculated precision, targeting the exact insecurity that had kept Emilia in the shadows for years. Before she could respond, a stagehand called her to position. Emilia walked onto the stage, the heavy curtain still concealing her from the audience. Beyond it, she heard Julian's voice welcoming guests, explaining the program changes with confident charm. Then the curtain rose, and hundreds of curious, skeptical eyes fell upon her. For one terrifying moment, Emilia froze. Then her gaze found Julian at the side of the stage, his expression filled with such complete faith that everything else receded. She sat at the piano, positioned her hands, and began. The first half of the program passed in a blur of concentration and release. Emilia moved through Bach with mathematical precision, Debussy with impressionistic delicacy, building to Tchaikovsky with increasing confidence. Each piece earned stronger applause, confusion gradually giving way to appreciation in the audience's response. During intermission, Emilia remained backstage, avoiding the crowd. Through the partially open door, she overheard conversations never meant for her ears. "Technically proficient, I suppose," remarked a board member's wife. "But there's something common about her interpretation. You can tell she lacks proper training." "Julian's charity project, obviously," another voice replied. "First his uncle dies, then he's pushing this girl from nowhere. Makes you wonder what she did to earn such patronage." "I heard she's some orphan they had cleaning toilets," a third voice added. "Probably one of those savant types, all talent, no breeding." Emilia closed her eyes, Mrs. Harrington's warning echoing in her mind. This was their world, not hers. Whatever connection she'd felt growing between herself and Julian suddenly seemed naive, even dangerous. When the second half began, something had changed in Emilia's performance. Her playing remained flawless, but carried a new edge, a defiance, a declaration. She was no longer seeking approval but claiming her rightful place. The audience responded to this shift, leaning forward in their seats, captivated by the transformation occurring before them. For the finale, her adaptation of Julian's symphony, Emilia poured everything into the keys. Every rejection, every door closed in her face, every night spent learning in secret. The piece built like a life story, chaotic and uncertain at first, gradually finding structure and purpose, ultimately soaring with hard-won triumph. As the final note resonated through the hall, a moment of stunned silence followed. Then explosive applause. The audience rose to their feet, critics included. Emilia stood shakily, accepting the ovation with uncomfortable grace. Julian appeared at her side, presenting her with white roses before drawing her into a brief embrace. "Extraordinary," he whispered in her ear. His hands lingered at her waist as they took another bow together. At the reception afterward, Emilia found herself the reluctant center of attention. Critics requested interviews. The Yasunaga representatives spoke enthusiastically about doubling their grant. Students who had previously ignored her existence now hovered nearby, hoping for introduction. Julian navigated her through the crowd with protective attentiveness, his hand rarely leaving the small of her back. "Hiroshi Yasunaga wants to discuss a special scholarship program," he murmured, "for talented musicians without traditional backgrounds." Emilia nodded distractedly, increasingly overwhelmed by the scrutiny and forced smiles. Across the room, she noticed Mrs. Harrington and Theodore, Blackwell in intense conversation, repeatedly glancing her way. "I need some air," she whispered to Julian, slipping away before he could respond. On a small balcony overlooking the Academy gardens, Emilia finally breathed. The night air cooled her flushed cheeks as she tried to process the evening's events. Behind her, the door opened. "Hiding from your admirers?" Julian asked, joining her at the railing. "Just taking a moment," she replied. "It's a lot to absorb." Julian studied her profile. "You've changed everything tonight. The Academy will never be the same." "And that's good. It's necessary." He turned to face her fully. "Emilia, I want to offer you a position, not as staff, but as artist in residence, teaching, performing, developing the scholarship program with the Yasunaga grant." Emilia's breath caught. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious. The board would never approve. I don't need their approval, it's my academy now." Emilia turned away, gripping the railing. "Julian, people are already talking. About us. About why you're helping me." "Let them talk. It's easy for you to say that. You've never had your integrity questioned, your motives dissected." "Actually, I have. All my life." Julian's voice carried an unexpected bitterness. The great Julian Reed, riding his family's coattails. The privileged heir who couldn't possibly understand real struggle. The dilettante composer playing at running an academy. Amelia looked at him with surprise. Different cages, same bars, he said softly. People will always find reasons to dismiss what they don't understand. From inside came the sound of tinkling crystal, someone calling for attention. Julian sighed. That'll be Theodore's toast. We should go back. Julian, Amelia caught his arm. Why me, really? There must be dozens of talented musicians without my complications. He covered her hand with his. Because when you play, I hear truth. And truth is the rarest thing in our world. He hesitated, then added more softly. And because when I'm with you, I feel like the person I've always wanted to be, not the person everyone expects. Before Amelia could respond, the balcony door opened again. Theodore Blackwell stood there, his expression a mask of cordial displeasure. Julian, your guests are waiting. Ms. Novak, if I might have a private word afterward, regarding your future at Wellington. Julian tensed. Anything you need to say to Ms. Novak can be said to both
of us.
Actually, Amelia interjected, straightening her shoulders, I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Blackwell, alone. She gave Julian a reassuring nod. I'll join you shortly. Reluctantly, Julian returned to the reception. Theodore closed the door, behind him, his affable public persona dropping away immediately. Ms. Novak, let's dispense with pretense, he began coldly. Your performance tonight was impressive, but this academy has a century of tradition and reputation to maintain. I'm well aware of Wellington's traditions, Mr. Blackwell. Then you'll understand that Julian's offer, which I overheard, is impossible. The board would never allow someone of your background to represent Wellington. He straightened his bow tie with manicured fingers. However, we're prepared to be generous. A recommendation to a more suitable institution, perhaps a modest stipend while you establish yourself elsewhere. Amelia felt a familiar chill, the sensation of being disposable, inconvenient. And if I decline your generosity? Theodore's smile didn't reach his eyes. Julian is young, impulsive, and temporarily captivated by your novelty. But his family has entrusted me with protecting their legacy. I have documents, medical records, financial statements that raise questions about your suitability. Nothing definitively damaging, but enough to create doubt. You're threatening me. I'm protecting this institution and Julian himself. His reputation can't withstand a scandal, romantically or professionally. Theodore moved toward the door. Consider carefully, Ms. Novak. Opportunity or obscurity, the choice is yours. After he left, Amelia remained frozen, Theodore's words cutting deeper than any childhood rejection. Through the glass doors she could see Julian moving through, the crowd, his expression searching. When their eyes met across the distance, his face lit with a smile so genuine it made her heart ache. In that moment, Amelia made her decision. She would not allow herself to become Julian's downfall or the Academy's controversy. She had survived years of disappointment. She would survive this too. With one last look at the celebration that had briefly welcomed her, Amelia slipped away through the garden stairs, leaving only her performance as farewell. Hours later, in her small apartment, Amelia packed her few belongings with mechanical efficiency. Tomorrow she would submit her resignation. Tonight she allowed herself one moment of weakness, pressing her fingers to piano keys that couldn't possibly capture what she'd lost. Harmonious resolution dawn found Julian pacing his office, disheveled and bleary-eyed after a sleepless night. The triumph of the showcase had dissolved into confusion when Amelia vanished without explanation. His calls went unanswered. Her apartment stood empty when he finally drove there at midnight. She's gone, Professor Lee confirmed, entering without knocking. Resignation letter delivered to HR this morning. Collected her final paycheck and disappeared. Julian sank into his chair. I don't understand. Everything was perfect. Perhaps too perfect, Professor Lee suggested gently. She placed a folded note on his desk. She left this for me to give you. Said it would explain everything. When Julian was alone again, he unfolded Amelia's letter with unsteady hands. Julian, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. What happened last night was magical but unsustainable. We both know the Wellington Academy would suffer if you pursued the changes I represent. Your family legacy deserves better than controversy. Theodore Blackwell helped me understand the reality of our situation. Some worlds aren't meant to intersect permanently, no matter how beautiful the brief collision. I'm grateful for the moment you helped me find my voice, but I won't be the reason yours is silenced. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Amelia Julian read the letter twice, his confusion giving way to cold fury at the mention of Theodore. He stormed through the academy to the board chairman's office, bursting in without announcement. What did you say to her? Julian demanded. Theodore looked up calmly from his desk. I simply clarified the realities of her position here. Her position was whatever I decided it should be. Julian. Theodore's tone was patronizingly patient. Your impulsiveness is understandable but misguided. The girl was talented but unsuitable. The board unanimously agrees. The board works for me, not the other way around. Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. My uncle may have let you run this place like your personal fiefdom, but those days are over. Theodore's composure slipped. Your family entrusted me. My family entrusted me, Julian corrected. And I've finally figured out why my uncle named me his successor instead of you, despite your decades of service. He knew Wellington needed to evolve, but lacked the courage to make it happen himself. He moved toward the door. You have until the end of the day to clear out your office. The academy no longer requires your services. You're making a grave mistake, Theodore called after him. That girl will ruin everything your family built. Julian paused at the doorway. No, Theodore. She's going to help me rebuild it into something better. Finding Amelia proved more difficult than Julian anticipated. She had left no forwarding address, changed her phone number, and disappeared completely from Wellington's orbit. Days stretched into weeks as Julian divided his time between reforming the academy and searching for the woman who had catalyzed those changes. The Yasunaga Foundation Scholarship for Non-Traditional Students was established. Theodore's resignation was followed by several board members. Professor Lee became academic director, implementing Julian's vision for a more inclusive, innovative institution. But these victories felt hollow without Amelia to share them. After a month of fruitless searching, Julian found himself at the rundown community center where Amelia had first learned piano as a child. Information gleaned from her employment file. The elderly receptionist recognized Amelia's name immediately. Such a sweet girl, she reminisced. Came here every day after school. No one ever picked her up, so she'd play that old piano until closing time. Do you know where she might have gone? Julian asked. The woman hesitated. I shouldn't say. She was quite clear about wanting privacy. Please, Julian said quietly. I need to make something right. Perhaps it was his sincerity or the obvious distress in his eyes, but the woman relented. She's giving piano lessons at St. Margaret's in Millfield. But you didn't hear it from me. St. Margaret's turned out to be a small church with a modest after-school program for underprivileged children. Julian arrived as evening fell, the sound of an upright piano guiding him to a classroom where Amelia sat with a young girl, patiently, demonstrating finger positions. Julian waited in the doorway, watching Amelia's gentle encouragement as the child struggled through a simple melody. Her face lit with genuine pride when the girl finally completed the piece correctly, the same expression she'd worn during her own triumph at the showcase. When the lesson ended and the girl departed with a woman Julian presumed was her mother, Amelia finally noticed him. The shock on her face quickly transformed into guarded composure. How did you find me? She asked, gathering sheet music without meeting his eyes. With considerable difficulty, Julian replied, remaining by the door as if afraid she might flee. Again. You're very good at disappearing. Years of practice. Amelia finally looked up. Why are you here, Julian? Theodore Blackwell is gone, along with half the board. This clearly surprised her. You fired them? Because of me? Because they represented everything wrong with Wellington, everything wrong with classical music education in general. Julian took a tentative step forward. The Yasunaga Foundation doubled their grant. We're establishing a scholarship program specifically for musicians from non-traditional backgrounds. That's wonderful, Emilia said sincerely. Wellington will be better for it. It would be better still with you there. Julian closed the distance between them. Come back. Not as staff, not as a charity project, but as our artist in residence. Help me rebuild the academy into something that would have welcomed you from the beginning. Emilia shook her head. Julian, nothing has changed. People will still talk. They'll still question your judgment, my qualifications. Let them, Julian interrupted. I've spent my entire life trying to live up to my family's expectations, trying to be worthy of the Reed name. But when I heard you play that first night, when I heard what music could be when freed from tradition for tradition's sake, I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions. What questions should you have been asking? Emilia's voice was barely audible. Not, am I good enough for this legacy? But is this legacy good enough for what music could be? Julian took her hands in his. Emilia, you showed me the answer, don't disappear again. Emilia studied their joined hands. Julian, this isn't just about the academy. Theodore implied. He suggested that your interest in me was what? Professional? Personal? Julian's grip tightened. It's both. It always has been. I fell in love with your music first, then with the woman who created it. The woman who transforms everything she touches with quiet determination and extraordinary grace. The word love hung between them, neither acknowledged nor withdrawn. Can't come back just because you want me to, Emilia said finally. These children need me too. Then don't choose, Julian suggested. Bring them with you. Wellington has resources these kids could only dream of. Help me create a community outreach program, classes, mentorship, performances. Let's build bridges between worlds instead of walls. For the first time since he'd arrived, Emilia smiled, a small, cautious curve of her lips. You've thought this through. I've had a month of sleepless nights to plan. Julian returned her smile with a weary one of his own. I even composed a new piece about a woman who disappeared like Cinderella, except she left behind music instead of a glass slipper. Emilia laughed softly. That sounds terribly pretentious. It's absolutely dreadful, Julian agreed with mock seriousness. You'll need to fix it completely. That's your first assignment as artist in residence. I haven't said yes yet. Julian's expression sobered. I know. And if you truly want to stay here, I'll respect that. But first, there's something you should see. 2 hours later, Julian led Emilia through Wellington's darkened corridors. The academy after hours felt different, peaceful, full of possibility rather than judgment. He guided her to the east wing, stopping before a door she didn't recognize. This used to be administrative storage, Julian explained, unlocking it. Now it's something else. The room had been transformed into a state-of-the-art recording and teaching studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, while acoustic panels and recording equipment lined the walls. At the center stood a magnificent grand piano. The Emilia Novak Studio for Musical Innovation, Julian announced, flipping on the lights to reveal a discreet plaque by the door. Regardless of your decision, this space will serve students who come to music through unconventional paths. But I had hoped you might be its first director. Emilia circled the room in stunned silence, trailing her fingers over equipment worth more than everything she'd ever owned. When did you do all this? The renovations began the day after the showcase. The naming... Julian shrugged. That was always the plan, even before you left. Emilia sat at the piano, pressing a few keys to test its voice. Warm, resonant, perfectly tuned. It's beautiful, she whispered. Play something, Julian urged, leaning against the doorframe. The room needs its first music. After a moment's consideration, Emilia began playing, not a classical piece or even one of Julian's compositions, but something entirely new. It started hesitantly, searching for direction, then gradually found its way into a melody that spoke of uncertainty transformed into determination, of fear giving way to hope. Julian watched her, transfixed not just by the music but by the complete authenticity of the woman creating it, a quality so rare in their carefully curated world. When she finished, the final note seemed to linger in the air between them. "That's new," he observed quietly. "I've been composing," Emilia admitted. "Nothing formal, just processing. It's extraordinary." Julian crossed to the piano. "Like, it's composer." Emilia looked up at him, finally allowing herself to see the emotion in his eyes without fear or doubt. If I accept this position, it has to be on equal terms. No special treatment, no protection. I need to stand on my own merits. I wouldn't have it any other way." Julian offered his hand. "Partners?" Emilia hesitated only briefly, before taking it. Partners. 3 months later, Wellington Music Academy hosted its first community concert, a collaborative performance featuring Academy students alongside children from St. Margaret's and similar programs throughout the city. The event, organized by artist-in-residence Emilia Novak, filled every seat in the Grand Hall with a far more diverse audience than the Academy had ever welcomed before. Backstage, Julian adjusted his bow tie nervously as Emilia checked the program one final time. "Relax," she told him. "Everything is perfect. Easy for you to say. You're not performing a world premiere tonight." Emilia smiled. "Your composition is beautiful. The quartet is well rehearsed. All you have to do is introduce the event and enjoy. Watching your vision come to life." Julian caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture that had become natural between them as their professional partnership had gradually, inevitably, blossomed into something deeper. "Our vision," he corrected. "None of this would exist without you." The 5-minute call came and they moved toward the stage. Before they could reach it, Professor Lee intercepted them, looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Julian, the critics from the Classical Review and Modern Composer are here. Front row." "Good," Julian replied calmly. "They should see what we're building." "And Theodore Blackwell," Professor Lee added more quietly, "with several former board members and donors who withdrew their support after changes in leadership." Julian and Emilia exchanged glances. "Perfect timing," Julian said with genuine pleasure. "They can witness firsthand what happens when talent is recognized regardless of its origin." As Julian took the stage to welcome the audience, Emilia watched from the wings. The past 3 months had transformed Wellington in ways she'd never imagined possible: new scholarships, community partnerships, innovative programming that honored tradition while embracing evolution. And throughout it all, Julian had been not just her champion but her equal, challenging her ideas as often as supporting them, creating something neither could have built alone. The first half of the concert showcased the traditional excellence Wellington was known for, while the second half featured collaborative performances between Academy students and community children. Throughout, Emilia observed Theodore Blackwell's reactions, from skeptical to surprised to finally reluctantly impressed. For the finale, Julian took the stage alongside Professor Lee's string quartet to perform his new composition, Renaissance. As the piece began, Emilia recognized the themes they'd developed together during those intense nights preparing for the showcase, now expanded and refined into something that honored the past while boldly claiming the future. At the precise moment indicated in the score, Julian turned toward the wings and extended his hand, her cue. Emilia walked onto the stage, taking her place at the piano for the movement they had composed together. Their eyes met briefly before they began playing, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. The music they created spoke of transformation, of institutions and individuals, of barriers overcome and bridges built. When the final notes faded, the audience erupted in standing ovation, led surprisingly by the very critics whose approval Julian had once desperately sought. As they took their bows, Julian kept Emilia's hand firmly in his. When the applause finally quieted, he spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for sharing this evening with us. What you've witnessed tonight is just the beginning of Wellington's Renaissance, a commitment to recognizing extraordinary talent wherever it exists. He turned to Amelia. 6 months ago, this remarkable woman was polishing our pianos instead of playing them. Tonight, she stands as the embodiment of Wellington's future, proof that true artistry transcends background, circumstances, and expectations. Amelia felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes as Julian continued. In music, as in life, the most beautiful harmonies often come from unexpected combinations of notes. Wellington is honored to welcome artists from all backgrounds who bring their unique voices to our collective symphony. His gaze never left Amelia's face. And I am personally honored to share both stage and life with the woman who taught me to hear music, and myself, in an entirely new way. The implicit declaration brought another round of applause. As they left the stage together, Amelia caught sight of Theodore Blackwell, his expression unreadable, but his applause seeming, against all odds, genuine. The reception afterward hummed, with excitement, donors and critics alike approaching Amelia as a peer rather than a curiosity. Even Theodore made his way to her eventually, Julian tensing protectively at her side. "Ms. Novak," Theodore acknowledged stiffly, "it seems I may have underestimated the potential of your vision for Wellington." "Mr. Blackwell," Amelia replied, evenly. "I'm glad you could witness it firsthand. Several of my colleagues are reconsidering their position regarding funding," he continued reluctantly. "Your community initiative has generated unexpected interest." Julian's expression remained carefully neutral. "Wellington welcomes support from those who share our values, Theodore. Those values are non-negotiable." Theodore nodded once, sharply. "Understood." He glanced between them, noting their clasped hands. "I see some things have developed since our last conversation." "Many things," Amelia confirmed, meeting his gaze without flinching. "All of them for the better." After Theodore departed, Julian led Amelia to a quiet corner of the reception. "You handled that with remarkable grace." "I've learned from experience that the best revenge is success," Amelia replied. "And this," she gestured to the diverse crowd filling the hall, "is success beyond anything I could have imagined." Julian studied her face with undisguised admiration. "When I first heard you playing in that empty practice room, I thought I'd discovered a hidden treasure. I had no idea you'd end up transforming everything. The academy, our music, my life. We transformed them together," Amelia corrected softly. "Partner." Julian smiled at the term that had come to mean so much more than its professional connotation. "Partner," he agreed, before lowering his voice. "Though I've been thinking lately that another title might suit us as well." Before Amelia could respond, they were surrounded by eager students and patrons, the moment suspended between them like a promise yet to be fulfilled. Hours later, long after the reception ended, they returned to the Amelia Novak studio. The moonlight streamed through the windows as Julian closed the door behind them, finally alone after the evening's triumph. "There's one more piece I'd like to hear tonight," he said, gesturing to the piano. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Haven't we performed enough for one evening?" "This one's just for us." Julian guided her to the bench sitting beside her. "Play the composition you were working on yesterday, the one about finding home." Amelia began playing the piece that had emerged during her reflections on the past 6 months, a melody about discovering belonging not in a place but in a purpose, in music, in connection. As she played, Julian reached into his pocket, waiting for the precise moment in the composition when hope transformed into certainty. As Amelia's fingers created that transition, Julian placed a small velvet box on the piano. Her playing faltered, briefly, then continued with new emotion as she registered what it meant. When she finished, the studio fell silent except for their breathing. 6 months ago, Julian said quietly, "You thought you didn't belong in my world. I thought my world wasn't worthy of your talent. We were both right in a way." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "So we built a new world together, and I'd like to keep building it with you, not just as artistic partners, but as equals in everything." Emilia touched the ring with trembling fingers. Julian, the orphan nobody noticed, he quoted from a piece she'd composed about her journey. Except I did notice. I heard you, I saw you, and I love everything I discovered. Julian took her hand. Emilia Novak, will you marry me? Emilia had spent a lifetime training herself not to hope too much, not to want too deeply. But in this moment, looking into Julian's eyes, she finally allowed herself to embrace the full measure of joy that had been building since that first night when music had connected them across social divides. Yes, she whispered, and then more firmly, yes. As Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, Emilia realized that the true harmony they'd created wasn't just in their music or in the reimagined academy, but in proving that authentic connection transcends all artificial barriers. That love, like music, recognizes no distinctions except the truth of what resonates in the heart. And in that perfect harmony, the melody of their future began.